before we read it, what were your thoughts? What did you think after hearing the story?
I mean,
what is
water
your
is wet, the
assessment?
sky is blue. Our government is a corrupt courtocracy in cosplaying as a democracy. You can fill in the blank. So it's, I mean, it's bad when Jacobin of all places is now saying what we have been saying this whole time, but we generally get smeared or cussed out, when we actually say this. So it doesn't mean, it doesn't really mean a lot to me, given that this is banned, because he's still going to go to bat for the Democrats anyway when it comes time to it. So, but yeah, as I said, it's it's bad if Jacobin is having to say the truth in this way.
What I always ask in these contexts of the revelation of the sort of these professional managerial class type of magazines or articles like The Nation is that what is the consequence that you're going to like, what is the ramifications? It's just sort of you did bad,
right?
And there's never a thing that would show them that their voters or constituents are not happy with what's going on. But let's read the article and we can probably respond a little bit better. Let me know, any spot you want me to stop. I can't see you, so you got to give me a verbal sort of cue. But let's read. Leading left-wing politicians, including Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, and most recently Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, have already endorsed Joe Biden, even though primary voters haven't yet had their say, and most Democrats in polls don't even want him to run. So that is the wet, water is wet sort of argument, I would say. But let me continue. A few days ago, Democratic Socialist Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, became the latest in a string of prominent progressive politicians to endorse Joe Biden's bid for re-election. One of her fellow squad members, Minnesota's Ilhan Omar, endorsed Biden almost a month ago when AOC wasn't quite ready to join her. Bernie Sanders endorsed him way back in April, but why should any of them endorse Biden, especially right now? It would be one thing if this were late 2024 and the country were facing an imminent choice between Biden and Donald Trump, or Biden and Ron DeSantis, and there was a real danger that the greater evil would win. Right now, though, we're several months away from the first primaries. And let me pause here because I have a reaction here. And that is, they're trying to make a distinction that basically we're going to lay over, and eventually, but why are we doing it right now is the basic argument. But this is the part where I tweeted about, and it wasn't because of this article, but just somebody else was making this argument that it would be one thing if this was late 2004 and the country were facing an imminent choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and there was a real danger between a greater evil would win, a greater evil. He's acknowledging that the Democrats are evil, I guess, but that they would win, and somehow that they are greater. And we've all kind of tweeted about this, but has the Joe Biden presidency been the lesser of the two evils as far as legislation, as far as the effects policies between the Trump presidency and now? Do either of you have any opinions on that, about which one has been, I don't know, measurably better, like things that you can actually point to, not just like a feeling of better? Does anybody have like an opinion on whether or not the two presidencies are sort of equal, or one has been worse than the other?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yes.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I'm personally not against the idea of voting for the lesser of two evils, but between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, there is no lesser evil. They're by every single metric the same. If not, Joe Biden's probably worse. Joe Biden's probably deported more people than Trump has in his 4 years. In 1 year, Joe Biden deported more than Trump did in 4 years. And the same thing with Obama. Obama in his first year, in his last year, deported way more undocumented immigrants than Donald Trump did his first year. And we were all like the entire country was almost panicking at the thought of Donald Trump starting World War III, and here's Joe Biden literally starting World War III, and more than half the country is literally actively cheering him on in that. So no, there is no lesser evil in any of this between Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Hillary Clinton. Name a person. Like, there is no lesser evil. So find me a lesser evil, and I'll like arguably say, okay, maybe it might be worth voting for that person if there is a lesser evil. But there is no lesser evil here. That's one thing I wanted to say. But the other thing I wanted to mention was, do you guys remember the timeline of events for the 2020 election? We were all pushing AOC to endorse Bernie, the entire squad to essentially endorse Bernie ahead of time. But she said, no, I'm not going to endorse him ahead of time because the New York primary is in April, and I want to give the voters a chance to have their say in the vote. So I'm not going to endorse ahead of time. But then Bernie got that heart attack, and then she's like, oh, no, I got to endorse right away to help him with the campaign and everything. And we all know how the rest went. But she was actively supporting that. Oh, let's give the voters a chance to have their say in the matter in 2020. But now, come 2024, she's like, nope, I'm going to endorse Joe Biden right away. Where you're going to shut the fuck up, you're going to agree with me, and you're going to go along with it. So
I think that speaks to her acknowledging that she understands she's being used by the establishment to help Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. Like, she understands she's being an effective tool, or at least a progressive tool, I should say. But Colin, were you going to chime in, or Anthony, we're going to chime in before we get back to the article?
Go ahead, Anthony, because I spoke already.
Oh yeah, just I think it's very clear that they've coordinated this. This wasn't like, oh, I just happened, to endorse early. Bernie just happened to endorse early. Ilhan Omar happened to endorse early. This was coordinated. There was pressure put on them by the leadership. Hakeem Jeffries, most likely, who is one of the most virulent anti-progressives in Congress, worked really hard, Hakeem Jeffries, to undermine progressive challengers of Democratic incumbents. So he's a rat. He's not a good guy. And that's why he was chosen. And of course, the squad lockstep supported him. The only thing I can conclude from this is that AOC, Ilhan Omar, Alanna Pressley, Bernie Sanders are doing this, endorsing Joe Biden now, an enemy of the working class, because they do not want us to have health care. They do not want us to have a living wage. They want us to have massive military budgets, and they want us to be on the brink of World War III. There's no other reason for them to have done this except to silence any opposition. They haven't even heard, because they haven't even called for debates. It would have been fairly logical if I were in office, even if I secretly wanted to endorse Biden because I was going to go along with the establishment because it makes me money and keeps my seat safe. I might have said, well, let's wait for the debates. Let's hear from other people. We need to have debates. They didn't call for debates, and also, they have shown themselves by endorsing Biden to have joined the side of the enemies of the working class. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. We're in a fight for our lives. 68,000 Americans die every year because we don't have Medicare for all. And in the middle of a deadly pandemic where you've had popular support for something, Biden didn't even push the public option, and neither did they. That was inadequate, but at least it would have helped some people. So I tweeted this the other day. There are no progressives in the Democratic Party. There are no good Democrats. I mean, it's just where we're at now. It's we shouldn't be blamed for calling it out.
But if we want to look at the bright side, this is where, where all of us are in a position, or all of us, even just, if we don't have a podcast, this is the opportunity to sell people on coming together across all political lines, across different beliefs against one particular enemy, and that's the ruling class. So this is the opportunity with people so uninterested in politics, uninterested in supporting the Democrats. I saw on a newscast, I think it was I don't want to name and be wrong, but basically say that the support in for Democrats in the Black community was in the 80s, like 86%. And then a recent poll, it was down to like 53%, which is ridiculous for them. Like, that's terrible for them. And this is of Black people that participate, because more than half the Black people, the whole Black community, we don't participate in electoral politics. But of those that participate, they've said it's something like 30+% difference, which is devastating for them. So there is clearly a lack of interest in the Democratic Party in particular, where we're not believing this game anymore. And this is going to kind of tie into another story we have about Joe Biden that I mentioned, where he's basically saying, oh, it's time to codify. So codifying is back. But let me read a little more so we can get a little more through this article here. And again, Ben Bridges, I mean, this isn't accurate. It's not like we have any issues with the assessment. It's a pretty accurate assessment so far. But why? So I'll read this again. But why should any of them endorse Biden, especially right now? It'd be one thing if this were late 2024 and the country were facing an imminent choice between Biden and Donald Trump, or Biden and Ron DeSantis, and there was a real danger that the greater evil would win. Right now, though, we're several months away from the first primary. Socialist politicians should be articulating a clear alternative to the business as usual centrism of Biden and other leading Democrats. That's not all they should be doing. Of course, they should also work towards concrete reforms that will make life better for working class people in the here and now. And admittedly, these goals are sometimes in tension, but it's hard to see a long-term way forward for the left that doesn't start with being very clear about the fact that leftists and centrists aren't one and the same team. Same team. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so earlier today, I saw a post from the Democrat Party account on Twitter saying, shitting on Trump for suggesting that we should pull out of NATO, whereas, and having a side-by-side picture of Joe Biden saying we should expand NATO and saying the choice is clear, or something to that effect, basically suggesting that like expanding NATO is better. So they're, and I don't think Ben Burgis is a dumb guy. Like he knows this shit. Like this is his livelihood. He pays attention to this shit. The fact that he can still look at all that shit and suggest that Joe Biden is a lesser evil, despite everything he says. And then the sentence right here: leftists and centrists aren't on the same team, but then turn around and endorse the centrist candidate anyway. Centrist is being generous. Like right wing is just what Joe Biden is. That's just a reality of it. But it's just I do think it is a fair question for Ben Burgis to ask that, like, why is AOC endorsing somebody this early when last cycle she didn't? However, the idea of suggesting that Joe Biden is a lesser evil just shows you where Ben Burgis's loyalties lie, and where they're always going to lie, unfortunately.
It's almost like progressives know none of these things are going to work, but they still want to go through the motions. And she's skipping steps. You get what I'm saying? She's skipping steps. And he's like, wait. Let's just go through the regular emotions. We know we're going to eventually end up here, but let's go through the emotions. And this is where we kind of I think all of us have kind of spoken to this point where we're like, we don't want to, like, what we're saying up front, this is going to happen. So why are we forcing ourselves to go through these types of emotion. Is that a thing, Professor? Is that a thing where, say for instance, like in a relationship, a person who understands or sees or has gotten evidence that being in a relationship with this person is gonna be bad, but I'm just gonna do it anyway. Is that a thing in psychology or in your field?
It is a thing, but I would say it's not Bernie, AOC, and Ilhan Omar, etc., that are the ones that you're referring to. I would say that it's us.
Yes.
In particular, because in the dynamics of an abusive relationship, one partner has power and consolidates that power over the other partner. So domestic violence, intimate partner violence is less about physical abuse, although that happens, and it can be deadly. It's less about physical abuse than it is about power and control. One person consolidating their power over another person. And it's interesting how they do it. An abusive partner will prevent the victim. They'll try to cut them off from family members, from friends. They try to control their jobs. So they control all aspects of the person. So that person is very dependent on them. So it is not hyperbole to suggest that is exactly what the Democrats are doing to us, and that AOC, etc., are joining with the main abuser, who's Biden, and he's the head of the party ostensibly, and the party mechanism, the party structure, to abuse us. And it's typical in an abusive situation. They'll be like, listen, nobody, I may not be perfect, but you think you're going to find someone else there that loves you as much as I do. You're not worth it. And so those are things, it's really despicable. Being in an abusive situation really grinds away at a person's concept of self. That's what's happening to us. We are told, don't even look at the Greens. In fact, we're not even going to let them on the debate stage, and we're not going to let you look at anybody else either. Nobody else is serious. It's the same language. Hey, we may not be perfect. Hey, but those other guys over there, the Republicans, they're really, really abusive. This is typical perpetrator-victim dynamics. I understand why people that don't have the emotional and mental energy to dive into the issues like many of us do. I understand why they vote Democrat. I get it. I do. And everyone's got their own journey. But to suggest that these Democrats aren't abusive, I think you just framed it perfectly with that. So unfortunately, that's where we are.
Yeah, and then it feels like they're the enablers of this abuse. Like you're enabling it by telling people to go back, by somebody who's being giving them an advice to go back, and just that it feels like that's what some of these people in leftist progressive, so-called progressive media spaces are doing, because you if you are a reporter, you're on the ground, you should know firsthand the devastation of both parties, and you should be the first one, not sort of recommending that. And that's what it feels like to me. I don't know.
I would just say one quick thing and turn it over to everybody else, but let's look at those podcasters and see how much money they're making, because those who are truly working class and struggling aren't saying it. Maybe Jimmy Dore's probably an exception, because I'm guessing he makes something from his merch and from his large platform.
Oh yeah.
But and good, because he's a great critic of the Democrats. That said, you look at those other guys. Obviously TYT. They're perceived as left, but they're not. They're making tons of money, and so isn't Chank's cousin. on a podcast too, and of course,
Yeah.
Hassan, that's his nephew.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh,
And
okay.
Pod Save America, all these guys, like they're not making decisions. Do I pay the rent or buy
Right.
clothes for my kids for school? They don't have to make those choices anymore, so they're not on our side. They're not.
feels desperate. But let's continue through the article here. I left out. Okay, right here. So left politicians should be looking for opportunity to make those distinctions clear. A premature show of unity with the president who intervened to break a rail strike just 7 months ago does exactly the opposite. A strong signal of Democratic unity. The Associated Press headline about AOC's decision to endorse Biden called it a strong signal of Democratic unity, but how united are Democrats on a second Biden term? Just before Biden kicked off his re-election bid in late April, one poll found that 73% of Americans didn't want the president to run again. That number included 52% of voters who identify, as Democrats. Wow, so more than half, or slightly more than half. As Nathan Robinson points out in Current Affairs, which has been terrible on this topic also, current affairs, I must say. It's so weird how they all kind of know each other and reference each other to sort of give each other's credibility, but it's the same sort of milquetoast point of view, stay within the same Democratic Party. Because if you wouldn't guess it, but the way Nate Robinson is tweeted now is like he's all down for Cornell West, but everybody not forget the first article he wrote after Cornell West announced was like he shouldn't be running, or he should be running as a Democrat. That was the first article he wrote. Now he seemed to have softened a lot on that idea, at least in some of his recent tweets I've seen. But let's continue. As Nate Robinson points out in Current Affair, before Biden's announcement, we were seeing headlines like, quote, Democrats coalesce around a Biden 2024 run as re-election decision looms, side by side with ones like, quote, most Democrats don't want Biden to run in 2024, AP NOC poll finds, end quote. The key, Robinson pointed out, is to realize that Democrats mean two different things. There are a great deal of Democratic unity from above beyond Biden. Politicians and party officials were marching lockstep behind him before he'd even officially made up his mind. What there absolutely isn't is a Democratic unity from below. So I'm thinking he's saying, if it's coming between Democrats and Republicans, we're down for that unity. But, everything, I'm assuming that's what he means by below. Below is everything maybe in the primaries, maybe before him being the nominee. But what is your take, or what anyone want to chime in at this point?
I kind of interpret the below is us. That's how I interpret it.
Okay.
The idea that you can also make the argument that Republicans want Biden to win the nomination too, because especially given, let's make the assumption that Trump will win the nomination on their end, they need him to go against Biden, who of the two is politically and rhetoric-wise weaker than Trump is. The issue that I think Ben is mentioning is that Biden doesn't have that support from us in terms of, if you're more Democratic leaning, we are seeing the reality of how Biden has governed to how it has affected us in our day-to-day life for the last almost 3 years. The idea of now we're in inflation right now, things are a lot more expensive, just as far as basic necessities are way more expensive. You know, people are getting kicked off of healthcare now that the pandemic is over. People are struggling. And so people are not necessarily feeling that the Democratic Party, I think generally, especially if you're in the working class, really feels that Democrats have been looking out for their best interests. And then there's people like AOC, who we can guess is very aware of all the suffering that people are going through, especially in her district. And just to kind of ignore that, to endorse Biden a year and a half out from the election without making those considerations of the people apparent, I think is very heinous. The idea that Ben Burgis is saying the squad needs to talk more, they need to articulate these issues more. Haven't they been doing that? I mean, they say online, oh, we need Medicare for all. Oh, we need insert progressive policy on Twitter. But they're not doing anything, or at least very minimal, of pushing these policies to where there's actually action towards. And that's where I think personally the frustration is. It's one thing to kind of share on Twitter your needs, our needs, but you're not doing anything, or at least elevating the issues by action as to what to make those issues get a little bit closer to actually being a reality. Like the idea that Bernie said when he was on the campaign trail, like if he were to be president, he would be essentially I'm just paraphrasing here, the advocate in chief. So basically he would take on the role of challenging the establishment, holding rallies in that regard. You know, other than the stunt that Cori Bush and AOC did now 2 summers ago, where's the push? Where are the rallies? Where is the tension coming from them? So, and I agree with you, CJ. I think with Ben, he's almost kind of excusing all of that, or kind of not, maybe this was intentional or not, but Burgis doesn't mention this here. It's the idea of, we didn't vote the squad in to talk about these issues. We voted them in to challenge their party, because the Democratic Party, I would argue, is the larger problem, because we know that the Republicans are shit. We know this, and there's no need to kind of hammer that issue over the head. Like, we know the Republicans are shit. The question is, now that, well, Democrats still hold the Senate barely, and the White House barely, what are they doing, you know, to counter their own party, especially those members in their party who go against the interests of their constituents more often than not? We don't hear AOC talking about that. Instead, she blames the Senate. Like, oh, it's the Senate's issue that we haven't been able to get any of these progressive policies in place. When her leader, Nancy Pelosi, basically, that the Supreme Court quoted her saying that we cannot cancel student loan debt. She wouldn't dare do that. So there's been enough talking, but no action. And I think, and I don't remember the article well enough, but I don't think Ben has mentioned that in terms of, you know, he's saying, oh, we need to talk more, versus, you know, where is the action steps that the squad is giving to kind of encourage the people on the ground to actually move forward in some of these progressive policies that they claim that they want to see come to reality.
I can continue. This will be the last two paragraphs we're going to read, and then we'll move on to the next story. That doesn't mean Biden won't win renomination. Realistically, he almost certainly will, in large part because of the unity from above. That's the above part he speaks to. No Democratic elected official has thrown their hat in the ring to oppose him in the primaries. The only two candidates who have are RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson, widely derived as a conspiracy theorist with unsavory associations and a suspicious amount of Republican support. It's currently hard to see how Kennedy would get enough Democratic support to dethrone a Democratic incumbent, even one who doesn't inspire such much enthusiasm among Democratic voters. That is a curious sort of description. Now, I'm not a fan of RFK Jr., but this is a curious description, widely derided as a conspiracy theorist with unsavory association and a suspicious amount of Republican support. That is a very funny, weird way to describe it. And it comes straight out of cable news, mainstream media.
I mean, I can say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I mean, it kind of sounds like controlled opposition from right out of the get-go, because just from the way he's wording everything, it sounds he's immediately undercutting RFK Jr. I mean, I'm no fan of RFK Jr., but like the only time he mentions RFK Jr., he follows it up with like some undermining comment, So immediately, to me, it comes off as some sort of controlled opposition. Earlier in the article, there were some points that Ben Burgis made that I did agree with, but he's a wrong fucking messenger, because come 2024, he's going to fucking kiss Joe Biden's ass hardcore, and so he's falls out completely with everything he says. Like, no, get the fuck out of here. Like, okay, you made some good points, but you are the wrong fucking messenger. So this is everything he's saying here is just coming off as controlled opposition. Will he ever come out and support Cornell West running as a Green Party candidate? Will he? I don't think he will.
Probably not.
Because that will actually challenge the duopoly. That will actually challenge Joe Biden, and he's not going to do that. So, RFK, he has a shitload of criticisms, but to word it in the way that he did, immediately comes off as some sort of controlled opposition. Like, he's playing cover for Biden. Oh, Biden is the lesser evil. He's bad, but he's the lesser evil. RFK, oh, he's conspiracy theorist. Discard him. Get rid of him. He's not a serious candidate. Everything he says, everything Ben Burgis says, just screams to me controlled opposition. Don't take anything he says seriously. Take it with a grain of salt and just run the fuck away from him. That's just what I want to say about that.
I'm just wondering quickly, CJ, if you could share, when was this article published?
Oh, I think this is wait. Could have sworn
it was
yesterday.
Oh, in the past few days. Oh no, the Nation.
No, yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. Yeah, the Nations was last week. This was yesterday. Yeah.
Notice how they didn't mention Dr. West in this.
No.
So he's not even a consideration at all in this, because he's running now as a Green potentially.
Yeah.
He so I'm scrolling down to see if he does. I don't. Yeah, he doesn't.
And I don't think that's by accident. In a sense, it's just like
they're definitely afraid of him. They're definitely afraid of. So that leads me to the question, and I'll answer this here, and all of you can chime in. It's my thinking that if Cornell West is in as a Green, he wins the nomination. That's what most people think is going to happen. And they are on, they're going to gradually be getting on a bunch of states. So then they hit 40. Like, what level of vote shaming? Like, this is them kind of soft pedaling these articles they've been putting out about him, kind of soft pedaling, like, hey guys, he shouldn't be doing this. He should be running. But as it gets closer, and then they're still doing the general election sort of polling, and it's going to keep showing that, Cornell West is at 7%, is at 8%. Like, can you even fathom or even imagine what sort of vote shaming levels we will be at for some of these people like Pod Save America?
I'm not. You know what? I'm actually, and I don't want to speak on this like in a theoretical sense, but I'm actually kind of looking forward to this experiment of having Cornell West run as a Green, because even just, and I know you played a clip of those two Black pundits on, I guess it was MSNBC, who were commenting about they can go in. Even one of them couldn't go in that hard on Dr. West because they have a lot of respect for him, and given the implications of what Cornell West or who his star power is within the Black community, like, I think for a lot of Black people, especially, and I thought about this yesterday, especially those who are boomers, like, because Cornell West, he's the philosopher, but he also has that, pastor, bent to him, which I know, especially within the Black community, especially for the Black boomer generation, that's kind of appealing. Hell, we have Pastor Raphael Warnock, in the Senate right now, and he's a pastor, so that's going to appeal to some, especially given that if the issue is if Dr. West is able to kind of go out there and really do enough rallies to make sure that he gets his name out there. But he already has that star power. And I think this might be intentional that Burgis may not have mentioned him, because especially within the Black community, it's not to say that people wouldn't necessarily jump the gun and vote for him, but there would be some interest, I would imagine. There will be some pause as to, oh, let me look at him and see what he's about. And that, I would imagine there will be enough interest within the Black community to kind of pull some people away from the Democratic Party if that's the case. So I think
according to some polls, they've said that, and a couple of polls they've reported that the percentage that he pulls from the percentage of Black voters they pull. So I'm saying pull and siphon. These are the words they're using. That he does is a higher percentage than any of the other groups.
And Democrats always rant and rave of how they need a Black vote. So I think especially within that group, Dr. West has a huge advantage that, because Marianne and RFK, as Apollo said, when it's all said and gone, they're going to kiss Joe Biden's ass, come by this time next year. We know this. Dr. Cornel West doesn't have to, because he's running outside the duopoly. And I would argue, depending on how well he does, he's going to be more of a threat to the Democrats, especially within the Black community, than the. So I think right now they're trying to downplay it a lot because they don't want people to really think of that possibility. But it'll be interesting to see come next year this time, like especially if Dr. West continues to grow his profile politically, he'll become more of a threat to the Democrats. And that actually might force them to change their rhetoric in terms of things that they say that they're going to do to try and keep as many Black people in the Democratic Party as possible. So I think right now, this is on purpose that they can't go on West too hard, but they can't say him yet because
he's almost the perfect candidate. He's just about the perfect candidate for a third party that wants to begin a shift and scare the shit out of
Right.
the establishment, because he and I'm using this language, he's almost unimpeachable publicly as far as his image, because they've had him on for so long
Right.
on their own shows,
Right.
praising him. Like
right.
almost every single person has been doing that, and it's in the interviews they kind of go, wow, where they're not even going hard at him, they're just kind of reporting this is what's going on, and they're really not even like going at any sort of character sort of assassinations.
Right.
And this is why I think they are really fearful, because if he's starting at 6%, it's only going to get higher. I think he
Right.
could, in their own polling, get as high as maybe 9% if they're not lying, maybe 10% if they're not trying to skew
Right.
it. It might even get as high as 10% in
And
their own
with
polling.
the added bonus for Dr. West that he's been on independent media too. Like,
Right.
and I think especially
Right.
knowing that he's being accountable to you and Nick coming on regularly in RBN, you know, that's going to
Yeah, that's
help
really-
him immensely. So
They'll-
it'll be very interesting to see what the Democrats in this case are going to do, because they can't go
I
at
think
it
you're
that
going
hard.
to have to find a way to be careful that they don't try to get RBN off of YouTube. I can see that happening, you know, at some point in the future. I mean, we see it with other things. Just a couple of comments about the way they're framing RFK Jr. And the way they're ignoring Cornell West. That shows very clearly. It's Ben Burgis is the name of this.
Yes, that's the name of this writer. Uh-huh.
That Ben Burgis and Jacobin are clearly an establishment outlet disguised as a progressive leftist outlet, because it's the subtlety of, oh, well, RFK Jr. and just saying he's widely derided. There's a thing that they do in the news business. Some would say it's a phrase they use often. You know, some would say, who's some?
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying it, and you're allowed to have an opinion. If he said, see, Ben Burgis is a coward and not a very honest journalist. If Ben Burgis was an honest journalist, he would say, here are the people who have called RFK Jr. conspiracy theorist. Here's why. And there are receipts to back them up, or no, they're not. Like, that's what a reporter should do. Not just say somebody called someone a bad name and leave it at that and not name the names. Listen, I was accused early on of like, oh, you're supporting RFK Jr. And I'm like, listen, I haven't declared my support for anyone yet, except a few days ago. I just said, you know, I'm supporting Cornell West. So I am now. But RFK Jr. has some good points, especially about the Ukraine war. I'm glad he's there. I would like to see debates because I would like to see it discussed. I care about issues and policies being discussed. He has the ability to do it. He's a smart man. He's an environmental lawyer. He's done great things as an environmental activist and attorney. He deserves to be taken seriously. But why would they do this at the same time? And I'm not sure who, it might have been Apollo who pointed it out, that they didn't even mention Cornell West. I read another article, not by a leftist organization, but they didn't mention Cornell West either. And I think this is their way of trying to destroy Cornell West, just not even mentioning him. And what an affront and an assault when you look at what that man stands for. A living wage, people being treated decently in the workplace, people having livable communities, looking at a global working class, we all have something in common. The fact that he stands for these things and they're ignoring him, I think, is an assault on the working class. And it's really sad to see. And then to say that I mean, come on, talk about yellow journalism. RFK Jr. hangs out with unsavory characters. I mean, Joe Biden hangs out with unsavory characters. His son is Hunter, for the love of God. A crack smoking, lying on his gun application, sex worker crazed, who probably left cocaine at the White House.
Yes.
I mean, let's not talk about unsavory characters.